It's another edition of the podcast Super Friends, and we are live in many, many time zones today. But we'll bring everyone in here and say hello. In fact, there's even more people coming. You're not even going to believe this. Because he's late. We don't even know where he came from, but now we're all here.
He lives
here. He does.
Hi, everybody. I apologize for my lack of voice. I've just back from an alumni weekend in Syracuse yelling in a college bar for 3 straight nights, but I would not miss this for the world.
Well, he joins us 10 seconds into the show, and it's great to see you, Jag. I'm Matt Kundle. I am the owner of the Sound Off Media Company, coming to you from Malaga, Spain.
Bueno.
Johnny Podcast has turned into a test pattern, but
yeah, I love it. Yeah.
I love this new camera.
All right.
While Johnny's figuring that out, I'm Catherine O'Brien, admiring these beautiful colors on the test screen, and I'm here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and my company is Branch Out Programs.
I'm Johnny Podcast, coming from Fort Worth, Texas, and I'm testing out a DSLR camera running into a cam link, so hopefully get some better video. So if it does cut out, that's the first time I've ever seen it do that, so ignore me. And if you're listening on audio, you have no clue what I'm talking about.
Right. I'm David Diaz in Boston, pod617.com, the Boston Podcast Network.
I'm John Gay from Jag in Detroit Podcasts, where we create and produce podcasts for local businesses and national businesses and international businesses and nonprofits.
Excellent. And your voice is a little bit raspy. Where were you?
So I was at the annual alumni banquet for WJPZ Syracuse, which is the station that is run exclusively by Syracuse University students. We celebrated 50 years on the air, had about 200 people in Syracuse, New York, and that tells you dedication, going to Syracuse, New York in the first week in March in a snowstorm. But we had a wonderful time, and it was an incredible event.
It's been a big month for you too, Jag. Can you give the podcast a plug as well?
Yeah, sure. So I was actually recognized for a podcast that I helped put together called WJPZ at 50, where we're still actually cranking out episodes now. It's a podcast series commemorating the radio station, interviewing the alumni of the radio station from the 1970s to the 2020s. It's been a real labor of love, and it's been a lot of fun to connect people and tell everybody's stories. So whatever year you went to Syracuse, you learned about what students in other decades dealt with.
Wow.
Well, as a great man once said, radio, someone still loves you.
So I can tell you 200 people in Syracuse that still do. So
we'll start off the show today. We'll let Johnny, who put this out, he gave us a little preview last night about the podcast pyramid. I love it. I had to title the episode a little bit differently than just calling it the podcast pyramid, because then it's going to sound like everyone's going to want to get in on this scheme. So so I titled it slightly differently, and then realized, well, isn't that what a pyramid scheme is supposed to be, is to lead you to some form of success? But I'll let Johnny explain the podcast pyramid that he's created.
Matt, I think you read my Substack, because that was the first line. I said, this ain't a pyramid scheme, but it is a pyramid. So I was just writing the Substack post yesterday, and I don't know, I've had a lot of conversations with people, talking on Twitter, seeing people talk online about what is kind of the most important thing in podcasting, or when they start a podcast. And unfortunately, this is a thing that we all deal with, is it always comes down to money. They're like, I want to get into podcasts. I want to eventually monetize. I know, I promise you guys, it's not my first goal. It's not my first goal, but it's my second goal. It's my third goal.
It's my secret goal.
And then I tell them, okay, well, have you thought about do you have a camera? Do you have microphones? Do you have headphones? Like, what are you going to talk about? Who are you going to talk about it with? And they go, I don't know. And so I was like, okay, I need to just map out in the simplest terms, what is the most important? And we need to talk about building blocks and put this in sort of just a format that's easy for people to understand. So in a typical pyramid, the base layer is the most important thing. And I thought to myself, okay, what is the most important part of a podcast? And ultimately, it's the content. You have to entertain people. You have to educate people. However you're going to approach the podcast, what you're saying to people is the most important thing. That's why they're tuning in. So that is our base layer, is the content. That's why people are tuning in, is to hear you talk about X. So you've discovered what X is. Now we need to talk about production. That's the next layer of the pyramid. Production is your microphone, your setup, the fact that you look and sound good. If you don't have those things combined with your content, you could be saying the greatest thing in the world. People aren't going to want to tune into you because it hurts their ears. And there's honestly just too much content out there that's better quality from a production standpoint that they could choose to tune into. So we start with our content base, we add on top of it a layer of great production, and that's how we find our audience. The audience is the next level of the pyramid. And then within our audience, we need to find out who that audience is. Who's actually coming to my podcast to consume my content? Where do they hang out online? What are their demographics? What do they like to do? And do they have disposable income? And if so, what level of disposable income do they have? So, okay, so we figured out who's listening to our podcast. Now we step into our marketing. We're talking paid advertising, podcast swaps, trailer swaps, short clips, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, things like that. Because now that we've discovered who's listening to our podcast, we can target where to find more of those people who just haven't discovered our podcast yet. And now we've built up everything in our pyramid except for the top piece. Now we have sponsorships. We have something that we can present to companies who we know fits our audience profile, sees our content and goes, okay, this is actually good content that we would be comfortable putting our brand name behind. It's a high production quality, and we're going to be getting in front of the eyeballs and ear holes of the people that we want to be our ideal customers. And that's when you put together your pitch deck, where you show them the podcast, look how amazing our content is. You show them the audience, look, it's the exact demographic you're looking for in a customer. You present them the terms. You say, look, we're going to give you X, we're going to take X number of dollars for you for a time on X number of episodes. And then you rinse and repeat. And so that's a really long-winded answer of saying, I feel like this is a really good structure for how people should approach their podcast, whether they're starting off brand new or they are in the middle of their podcast and they feel like they didn't start off on the right foot.
Yeah.
So I want to apologize because I wanted to share the screen of the podcast pyramid, and then I realized that Chrome is not going to let me do it because Chrome has decided to do its own thing today. I don't know how that happened, but whatever.
I think I can pull it up on my end.
Can I? Yeah. Oh, well, you've got like 10 cameras, and one is actually a test pattern, so you might be able to share it through that.
While you're doing that, Johnny, I wanted to pop in, and I love what you put out on your Substack about the pyramid. And just a little kind of one thing that stood out to me, especially as you were describing it, is the first two layers of the podcast, the foundation, if you will, are things that people who are considering doing a podcast can start working on right now. So those are like pre-planning. Now, of course, you can keep bolstering up that foundation the whole time you're doing a podcast, but there's no stopping getting those first two pieces together now.
Very true. There it is.
Oh,
I tried sharing my screen. I have it shared, Matt. I don't know if you have to allow me to, or
technically savvy group here. No.
That is the improv of a radio jock right there.
Right there. There we go. Woo.
Okay, so without going through the whole spiel again, you can see, for those of you watching, you'll see obviously the bottom layer content, then we move up to production, audience, marketing, $signs. So I feel like the majority of people kind of have this flipped. They spend all their time worrying about how they're going to market this non-existent content that they haven't put any concept into their production. They don't know who their audience is, in the hopes that they are going to make money out of it.
Yeah. So if you go into some of the Facebook news groups, I mean, we know that every second question is, how do I monetize my podcast and how do I market my podcast? And the bottom of the pyramid has not been addressed yet often. Yeah. All right.
Correct. Well done, Johnny.
Thank you. Should I trademark that?
I was wondering if it might have been out of order, because that's the kind of thing I go to.
Well, that's why. That's what when we were talking about like what topics do we want to bring to the table for the podcast today. I was like, I'm super open to arguing over this and being wrong about this, and I add layers, subtract layers, combine layers, move them around. So if anyone has anything.
Yeah, the only one I would move around is marketing first and then audience, because I don't know. But at the same time, they may actually go.
They might be together.
They might be together because of word of mouth. So somebody hears the show, and then that becomes your marketing, and then you market, and your audience will grow from that.
Yeah, because like on one hand, you create the podcast for an ideal person. You've kind of created this listener in your mind. However, that can change as your audience starts to develop. You go, oh, I actually thought I was making it for X group, but it turns out that Y group is the type of people that are tuning into this podcast. So my thinking there was, once you find out who your audience is and who's consistently coming to the show, then you can start to put a little bit of oomph behind marketing more to those types of people rather than the people who you think are going to tune in, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I was in the same vein. I think that the audience is a little bit further down towards the foundation, because you need to know who they are, what they want, and what they need, because we know that you give people what they want, but you deliver what they need, that kind of concept. So you can't really, I wouldn't want to invest marketing efforts in that until you had those things really solid.
Yeah.
Another good point to make, too, is that where audience and marketing go together is that one of the top methods of podcast discovery is word of mouth. So your audience and your marketing are going to work together in that regard, too.
Yeah, that's true.
My question is, how long does this take?
Matt always says 1 to 3 years to monetize. That's always Matt's line.
Well, I think it's 3 years to build an audience.
Right.
But to get to that money point, I think it's different for everyone. But let's say I was asking you as a client, Johnny, how long before I see that top of the pyramid?
I think it would depend. I mean, this is such a cop out, but it's like, it depends. So let's just let's do an example show here. So what do we want our podcast to be about, Matt?
I had 2 beers at lunch today. I'm in Spain. I'm many beers ahead of everybody. I'm probably not the right person for short snappers today.
Catherine, what do you want your podcast to be about?
Relocating to Spain.
Relocating to Spain. Okay, great. So we're gonna be finding an audience of people who potentially want to leave their country that they're living in to move to Spain. So our content is going to be all about the glorious country of Spain, what there is to do. Maybe we use episodes to break down all of the different countries and counties and towns in Spain. And then we can dive even deeper and be like, what does the actual real estate market look like here? We can interview people who are realtors in Spain. We can talk to tour guides from Spain, things like that. So that's going to be the idea for our podcast. So we've got our content, we get you the mics, we've got our production, we know who our audience is going to be. To get all the way up to the money side of things, I would think that I would agree with Matt. I think you would have to put out at least a year's worth of content, unless you are somebody who is already really big in the travel space and you have a lot of connections in Spain, which would make sense if that's kind of what you're leaning towards for your podcast. I think you could get there a lot quicker, maybe 3 to 4 to 5 months. And now you're partnering with who are the big travel, what's the word? It's a term that used to be a really big thing, a travel guide or like
travel agent,
travel agencies, hotels, restaurant, tourist attractions in Spain, realty companies in Spain. You can privately pitch all of those companies and probably start monetizing relatively quickly. I would be interested to see how big that audience actually is first, but I would say 3 to 4 months on the best end, 8 months to a year on a traditional trajectory. But you'd have to be really diligent. We're talking like you're putting out content, so much brand new content. It's really fresh. You're putting your all into this thing. This isn't some bullshit podcast that you're doing once every quarter and thinking you're going to monetize it.
Market is explicit, Matt.
I was just about to say, somebody remind me to mark this as explicit.
I can't help myself.
I would point out that, if you did a year's worth of podcasts, that would be 52 episodes. And from that, you've had 52 meetings with experts in the industry. And from that, you'll get some business that may or may not come out of it. So I think the money can start a little bit before that, or by the time you've had 50 episodes, that's a pretty good marketing network that you've got going.
Absolutely. And then on your end, Matt, with the DAI, that's a whole catalog of stuff that you're really ready to just pull the trigger on and sell. You don't have to worry about selling episodes forward. You have everything behind you that you can sell and monetize.
Plus, can I throw in here, this is the great time to, on those 52 episodes that you've done, you'll get the feedback from your audience, like what worked.
Yeah.
I think that one of the biggest lessons I've learned from podcasting is to double down on the things that are actually working. There's always that gap between what you think is going to be a hit and what actually hits with people. And just being able to see what you get the most response from, the most comments on, the most questions about, and that it will help you hone in on what your audience really is actually wanting from you.
And how would you go about do it? Like, so, we talk about all these different ways to communicate with your audience. Like a show that I'm working on now is actually doing an audience poll where for 4 episodes, he's put a Google form into the episodes to get people to give feedback. I feel like the most surface level thing that people would think of when you say that, Catherine, is like, which episode is getting the most downloads? And I feel like there's a lot of factors that could play into why an episode gets so many downloads. So what would your recommendations be for people?
Not to be it depends-er, but like depending on the podcast, like, so there are a couple shows that I work on that I know when the host gets emails, that's the thing for us. So we actually have a way to email the host in the show notes. And when she actually gets the emails, that's like okay, now I'm really paying attention, because that takes a certain level of opting in where people are actually doing something. They've had to overcome a couple of barriers to get to that. And
that's a core listener.
Yeah. So that we're going to listen to that person.
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of having your email in there, or just creating a Gmail kind of catch all for the podcast. It's like, if you have anything you want to say to the host, questions, whatever, just throw it in that email.
And it's important to mention too, at the end of the episode, not to have too many calls to action. That point that Johnny makes and Catherine makes is really good, that you want to have email us any feedback or concern. But if you start saying like and rate and review and follow us and email, people are going to lose all of that. So I really think it's wise to have one consistent call to action. And if you're soliciting for feedback, make that your call to action for a handful of episodes, and then you can change it if you want. But really try to keep to one call to action at the end of each episode.
Yeah, it's effective.
Yeah, they call those the doggy commands. David.
Yeah, well, I have a question for Johnny, or for the panel, or for anyone listening. It's I think the pyramid is well crafted, Johnny, and I think it makes sense. So much of what we do is making sure we don't put the cart before the horse, and making sure that you have great content and your podcast sounds great. It gets to the point right away. It has interesting segments, interesting guests, before you start worrying about who's listening. But let's say you're pretty confident in that. So you're in the middle of the pyramid now, and you've got an audience. And let's say maybe you're getting somewhere between 200 and 300 downloads per episode. And you're starting to hear from people in emails, but you just kind of plateau there, right? You're kind of stuck there. This is the dilemma I wrestle with time and time again. It's like, then what do you do? And do you go back to, maybe I need different content, or I'm doing the marketing things that people say to do. I'm doing the social media. I'm sharing it. So this is obviously an open-ended question. There's not necessarily a right answer, but I don't know, Johnny, maybe you want to start with that. And
I think Matt, I think we need to title this episode the "It Depends" episode, because so think about this, like 200 to 300 downloads an episode. If you're getting a lot of email traffic off of that quote unquote small of an audience, that's fantastic. Yeah, I wouldn't change. I would not change my content. If you're getting so much interaction from your listeners off of 200 to 300 listeners, and they're actually emailing you, and it's a significant number of them are doing that, I wouldn't change up your content. I would probably double down on who your audience is. Just because it's 200 to 300 people, that doesn't mean that that's the only 200 to 300 people in the world. I think that's when you jump up into the marketing segment of the pyramid and go, okay, we know who's listening. Now, where do we find those people who haven't found the podcast out on the internet? Because they're out there.
This episode is brought to you by Depends, by the way.
Yeah.
We're not quite that old, Jack.
But I did have a question by the way. Go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to say, maybe, I mean, I know that we're talking about the pyramid, not necessarily about growing your audience, but do people, I mean, the latest sort of effective tool that I seem to hear on other podcasts and everything is that if you're doing the social media, and Johnny, I think you once gave a good piece of advice that don't go crazy with social media. Find a social media channel that seems to work for you, where you're getting feedback, and stick with that. But let's say you're doing that. There are always new things that you can do. I've heard the latest is really try to promote yourself and try to get on other podcasts.
That's just what I was going to say. The new thing is the old thing. It's right. So you take your 200 to 300 people and you say, what other, maybe you email them all back, or you just call it out and say, hey, you guys have been really great about emailing me. Let me know what other podcasts you listen to, and then try and go get on those podcasts. Because then if their audience is similar, you can now reach, at just as many people who listen to that show.
I hadn't
and
heard
bring
that
them over.
before. Okay, so you ask your existing audience what other podcasts they listen to.
And yeah, I'm just thinking of this now. This is under the context of like they're emailing you like crazy, and so they want to hear back from you. But I would make that call to action. What other podcasts do you listen to? And then I think, oh, it's different. Never mind.
Well, and Matt has a tool that he uses, but you know there are tools that will say this podcast is similar to this podcast.
Yeah.
You can even see it within podcast apps. It's kind of like you may also like that. You know, at the bottom, if you know whatever podcast you're working on, it'll give recommendations for similar podcasts. You know, people who like this one also like this one. The algorithm is working.
In radio, we had a term called P1s. Those are your hardcore listeners, your primary one listeners. You think of it as being you're the first preset in their car almost. And then from there it goes, it's a P2, P3, and so on and so forth. And the phrase was always hug your P1s. Keep them close to you. Really super serve your hardcore fans. And by talking to them and finding them, you can really find out what they like and expand from there.
There was going to be a little poll question just to find out if we really could be sponsored by Depends. And that's, when was the last time anybody used a travel agent?
Yeah.
Full circle.
I know. Generational collide here.
1998, but they still exist.
They
Yeah.
do.
They do
I got
still
offered to work at one. I was working at Jamba Juice in high school, and a lady, I was working the cash register, and the lady's like, "I love the way you just interact with people. Do you want to come work for my travel agency?" And I said, "What is that?"
Oh,
Well, now it's YouTube
she's still
influencers.
telling that story. Yeah.
We booked a cruise, and my wife looked at some travel agent space that she found on YouTubers giving cruises. I don't remember if we booked it on our own or through an agency or not, but she considered it at least.
What if we signed up our listeners for a cruise? Where does that ship sail to? And what are we going to talk about and do?
We're all going to get on a boat and go transatlantic and go see Matt in Spain.
Yeah, no kidding.
You gotta
And
go
well,
through-
for our relocation Spain podcast, I mean,
That's
it's
right.
kind of necessary for us to do
Yeah,
that.
I think that's episode 1.
Okay. Remind me, we got to trademark all this by the top of the hour. So Infinite Dial took place, and Catherine and I were talking before everybody got together. I didn't get a note about this, or somehow I might have missed it. I thought that I was on an email list that would automatically, maybe when Tom Webster left Edison, he took the email list with him. But I didn't get a note for it, so it took place. But I did see it in the trades, and the Infinite Dial came up. And has anybody had a chance to go through it? I think it's not surprising that podcasting went up. Now, if we think back to last year, it took when you look at the weekly numbers, and I do like to look at the weekly numbers too, because that's the one when you know you've got a podcast listener, is when they're hooked on it and listening every week.
Yeah.
And so the numbers, as I'm just peering off to the side here, it went down. I think there was a lot of shock and horror, but everybody was going back to work. Right. And the prior year to that was the pandemic, where everybody dove into listening to podcasts because we had nothing to do. And so people went back to work. There's a drop. We're horrified. And then this year it comes back up. And Larry Rosen, who, he spoke to this, he said a lot of the numbers in audio have now leveled out. And we can now see that we're sort of back on a current trajectory of where we thought all this was going in the first place. So it's in the survey, it's 31% or 89 million Americans listening weekly, which is up from 26% in 2022. Now, it's a big jump, but again, we had irregularity in 2021.
And it's more than doubled in 10 years. I mean, just the growth is just insane. And I think, Matt, you made the great phrase of when's the best time to get into podcasting is right now is the best time to get in, because it's interesting how listening is going up. It seems like there's a lot more pod fading going on. A lot of the people who got into it in 2020, 2021 are fading away. And the real people, people who are really dedicated to it are the ones that are actually sticking around, and they're reaping the benefits of it now.
A Pod News fact that was floated this morning, I'll probably have the wrong number here, but it was about 232,000 new podcast episodes were released just last week. That's your competition. It's not the 4 million in the podcast index that you have to go up against, because those 232,000 they're the ones being marketed.
And then you niche it down into, they're not all business interviews. They're not all true crime podcasts. They're not all lawyer podcasts like David's podcasts. When you start to niche it down into the space that you actually play in, the competition gets even smaller and smaller and smaller.
The number of podcasts that people are listening to is up. It's up to 9.
So they have an 8, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got 9 here. U.S. weekly podcast listeners averaged 9 podcasts in the last week.
That's great.
When it was 6 and 7, I thought we can't do any more, but there's more. Yeah. Why?
Our episodes getting shorter.
Maybe I think there's a lot of short form stuff out there that people can consume.
Yeah.
So
I have to say, because as Matt shared, I was out of the loop. I feel a little silly. I felt a little silly knowing, it already came out. The thing that I really missed is the witty banter on Twitter with all these things come out. Every year I would find at least a couple of people, new podcasting people that I didn't know, that would make some very insightful comments about the information coming out for Infinite Dial and get a great new follow. So that's the part I'm really feeling sad about.
So I just want to drop just the social media part of this thing, because it really is, we get questions all the time. What is the best place to market your show, and on which one of these social media tools? So for the first time, there's Mastodon, Truth Social, and Discord, which finally got added. They've obviously sort of at the bottom, and I don't think we really have a formula on that yet. Facebook, down, especially with younger people, but Instagram is up. And TikTok is off a little bit, it appears.
For what it's worth, being around some current college students this weekend, Instagram is still really massive with them, with Gen Z. That is still one of their media of choice.
I think Instagram made a smart move by pivoting into Reels. They basically just said, let's just clone what TikTok is doing and offer that as well. So they have the brand awareness, at least in America, that Instagram has had simply by being out longer than TikTok. And they've been able to sort of mirror their model a little bit. So it's very easy for people to convert over to that.
Also worth mentioning, if you want to have a presence on Instagram with your podcast, somebody asked me recently, hey, how do I share this on Instagram? If you go to your podcast on Spotify and use the share button on Spotify, it will allow you to share that to Instagram. So if you want to have a presence on Instagram, you can do that from Spotify.
Yeah.
You can do the same with Amazon Music now, I found out too.
Excellent.
Oh, wow. Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know.
So for all the blah, 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 blah about Twitter in the last year, Twitter remains the same.
The rumors of Twitter's death, exaggerated apparently.
God, it's just but think of us all. We're all just like talk. And Twitter's going down the tubes. And now we see increase in Mastodon, Discord, Truth Social, and stuff like that. But Twitter didn't go away. I never understood the people who want to up and leave, because you're leaving your audience. That's where your audience is. They're not going to come with you. So you kind of have to still be there.
Yeah,
fish where the fish are.
Because even if you have X thousand number of followers, they're not going to see every single thing that you post. And so that conversion rate is already so low of them even seeing your post, then interacting with your post on a daily basis, and then taking the leap of being like, oh, I'm going to leave with you and join Mastodon because your content is just so freaking amazing.
Okay, so round the table, because this one I love. Big jump is LinkedIn.
That's what,
up to 26%. And so everybody talk about why they love LinkedIn and why they should be.
What slide are you on, Matt?
I'm on the social media slide.
Brand awareness.
Can you share
social
that
media
one?
brand usage?
Okay.
It's social media brand usage.
Okay, got it.
I would say with LinkedIn, I think a lot of businesses are really coming into the realization that they need to use branded podcasts, that branded podcasts are an excellent tool to market your business. And with podcasting growing again, and really growing over the last, doubling of the last 10 years, I believe Catherine said that, because of the massive growth of podcasting and awareness in the business community, I think that people are realizing that LinkedIn is a great way to have your professional branded business podcast and share it there.
Yep. I'll go next. I'm really embedded with a lot of people that are big on Twitter. Like they use Twitter as kind of that's why I'm such a big advocate for it, is all the people that I'm surrounded with use Twitter primarily. And what I'm hearing a lot of is that Twitter's algorithm has changed, and a lot of them are kind of just reposting a lot of their content over onto LinkedIn, and it seems to be performing very well. So they're taking a lot of their threads and things that they're posting and writing about that would normally perform really well on Twitter is not performing as well. Now they're seeing a ton of traffic on LinkedIn. So I think they're using it as sort of just like a backup to Twitter. So at least that in my sphere, that's what I'm seeing a lot with LinkedIn.
Well, I'm reminded of what bank robber Willie Sutton said when they asked him why he robbed banks. He said, because that's where the money is. So if you're thinking about monetizing your podcast, you could do worse than LinkedIn, simply because it's where businesses live. Businesses, professional firms, professionals, lawyers, investment advisors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's their world. They're a law firm. This is my world, so I'll speak to it. But a law firm might have a TikTok channel, but they probably don't know what they're doing on it. They probably don't know what they're doing on Instagram, and they probably don't know what they're doing on Facebook, but they know exactly what they're doing on LinkedIn. And so I find that the podcast that I produce, if there's a professional bent to it, and we post the latest episode, you'll get a dozen comments just saying, hey, that's great. Hey, I can't wait to listen to this. I just find that kind of traffic is worth its weight in gold, because then, as we know, you can shout out all those people on the next episode of the podcast. You can use them to become sort of ambassadors for your show. And the best way to build an audience is for others to be sharing your show. And so LinkedIn, it's kind of like a well-oiled machine as far as that goes.
Yeah, on LinkedIn, Dave, you're so right. They really push, like, anytime you comment on a post, all of their followers now see the post that you commented on. Right. And so getting 12 comments may not seem like a lot. It's probably not a lot on Twitter, but on Twitter, those comments that whole post doesn't get reshared to all of their followers. So it's just, It's a really good kind of duplication machine to just get it in front of a ton of eyeballs.
One thing with the Twitter algorithm that has changed, it is to the benefit of people who share content. So if you're a podcaster and you want to push stuff out to your audience and you're getting interaction from people, it will show up with people who are already in your audience. Yes. They won't have to scroll through for the whole thing. So that's nice. There was one other stat, though, that I thought, that just going back away from the social media too, and that was 55 plus listening did not move for podcasting, That's not, which I think that's a little concerning.
Did they all die?
Hey man, I'm almost there. Careful.
I don't want to say it, but I think I should say it because I'm a funny guy and I've already had like 2 beers at lunch today, right? Maybe it was the vaccine.
Oh no.
Don't worry, I'll edit it out on the.
I was going to say, now we're going to
side.
get kicked off of.
Oh, that was 2021.
No, now we're going to have the warning label above all of our content.
Learn more.
Yeah. Super.
Well, could it be? Oh, you go ahead, Catherine. You go.
I was going to say, philosophically, I think that podcasters should still continue to look at that as a potential, that they should see the older listener as a potential audience to reach. And having worked with a podcast that was geared to that audience, you can, if an audience is being underserved, then that should spell opportunity for you. And so I don't think that people should discount that, and just having that as a sort of little bit open to our 55 plus listeners.
Is that a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy there, Catherine, where is it a matter of there's a perception that folks over 55 aren't listening, so there's not a lot of content being created for them? Could that be a reason for the drop?
There's not enough content.
I wonder if there's a lot of truth to that. Yeah.
There's not enough content being created for them.
Well, think about, the traditional, the golden rule in advertising is that you're marketing to 18 to 49, 55 plus. Those people may have, given the boomer generation, they have a way more disposable income than millennials and Gen Z and Gen X. But
and there's way more of them now too.
There's way more of them now too. But the traditional advertising deal is, why would we pay to be on 55 plus? We want to market to 18 to 49.
Why do marketers do that? That's a family reunion, 18 to 49. I find
it's
it really
way
weird.
too big of a category.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jag, you put up with this for a number of years, like, trying to seek out 25 to 54 all the time.
Mm-hmm. Or 18 to 34 when I was in top 40 as well. And they don't have the money to spend, to Johnny's point, as 45 to 55 plus.
Yeah, and these same people, these same marketers, by the way, are probably trying to use Facebook to reach them. And of course, we just saw the data that says they're abandoning Facebook.
If you have a marketing firm and they're telling you reach your young audience with Facebook, fire your marketing firm.
Facebook is where meme
but
is.
it also depends on who your audience is. That goes back to the pyramid. If your audience is people above 25, they're probably not on TikTok. So should you focus your marketing efforts on Facebook? Maybe, if that's where the majority of your audience hangs out. But if your audience is 18 to 24, maybe you got to look at TikTok then.
And I know this is not exactly where we're going, but this is to me, this is where the YouTube question comes in for those people who are 55 and older, is because the familiarity of YouTube and some of the opportunities that YouTube are kind of exploring with podcasting. I think that might be a way to reach that audience.
Okay, so I just got to the line of scrimmage, and Catherine has made the call. We were going to talk about DAI, but we're now going to talk about YouTube.
I thought that was a natural, wasn't that? I thought that was a beautiful natural segue.
Yeah, well, I thought so too. That's why I took it. I just made the call at the line of scrimmage here. So
Omaha.
It's a football thing, Catherine.
Oh, yeah, got it. Yeah.
So YouTube has decided to venture into podcasting. There was
Again?
Google Podcast. Yes, again, they've decided to redo it. There's a long torrid history with this, and I'm not even sure where to start with this. But the advice that came down a few weeks ago was to organize your video podcast in YouTube in the format of a playlist. And if you did that, then you'd be able to participate. And I just opened up my YouTube last night, and I saw podcast. I saw the word podcast, and you could create a podcast by adding the videos in there and then put the artwork up. It did not ask for an RSS feed, but I thought, okay, that's interesting. So I already had the playlist done. And then I thought to myself, well, where is this going? And is this going to be a good thing? And if I give them my RSS feed, what are they going to do with it? Are they actually going to be populating the audio every week and putting it into YouTube Music, which is where I believe it's going to be headed? Or are they just going to be taking it and caching it? So from this information that we have so far, has anybody taken any steps to create their podcast and submit it to YouTube?
I have a client who does an audio only podcast, and we recently just started uploading them to YouTube. So I make the thumbnail, I put it up on YouTube as a video, and I put them all in a playlist because, Matt, I got the same option as you, where it offered, once I clicked on that playlist, it said set as podcast. So I did that, and so far nothing else has changed. Not the look, not the way it shows up for people. It just is now considered a podcast. So
there doesn't seem to be any machine that takes your RSS feed. It's just a way of labeling a video on YouTube.
Yeah, it's essentially instead of calling it a playlist, it's now called a podcast.
But if I understand correctly, it is conveniently, if you had other content, it is organized as a playlist automatically, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nothing.
Pretty much.
Although it doesn't hurt. I mean, it doesn't hurt to give attention to podcasts on YouTube, but we already knew these were podcasts, right?
This feels like what Google Play did. Didn't they do this? They sort of asked for our RSS feeds, and then they just sort of put it all up, and it sat in the Google Play store, and it was weird.
Yeah.
Well, I have a couple little tidbits of anecdotal. And I have to just right off the bat, it is totally anecdotal information about the YouTube podcasting thing. So similar to Matt, I started seeing prompts in the YouTube app for podcasting, and as I clicked through, one thing I did notice, and we all know I like some offbeat topics. I like some niches of niches. I can get really granular there. One thing I have been noticing though is that what we would call like small podcasts, they're getting good numbers for audio podcasts, but compared to other YouTube videos, they would be considered low views. I'm talking about in the couple of hundreds. I've been noticing that the YouTube algorithm is promoting what smaller podcasts to me. And I thought, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. That's something that I wasn't quite expecting. But if I click through on the tab just to see like what YouTube is saying as podcasting, I don't see really any difference from the stuff that I would normally see as videos. So that's kind of what David was saying, is that, what is the difference? I am, like I said, I am anecdotally seeing a lot of things that I otherwise would not see that are labeled as podcasts, but in sort of the main podcast arena, I'm seeing all the typical stuff that everybody sees all the time. Anyway, did that make sense? So I'm hoping that some of maybe the algorithms are working to boost shows that otherwise would not be seen, and getting them those views or those listens that they might not experience on other podcast platforms. But yeah, I'm kind of sort of cautiously optimistic about what the future holds. The other thing that I wonder is a big opportunity is advertising. Back to Johnny's marketing layer of the podcast pyramid, is I wonder how impactful it's going to be if people start advertising their podcasts on YouTube, doing paid advertisements to get in front of those audiences and get those eyeballs and ear holes to pay attention to their show. So, and I haven't quite heard a lot of people talking about that in the past before YouTube was making this move into podcasting. Every once in a while, I would see an audio-only podcast being promoted, paid sponsorship to be put in front of me. But yeah, so I'm wondering if that's really going to be it's going to be an opportunity for some of our podcasts.
I, right now, will not be participating in that because right now it's USA only.
Oh, well.
So that doesn't do my audience any good. And secondly, I don't think they're going to be picking up any of my ads from the DAI that I'm going to be putting out there. So I'm essentially going to be doing all the work promoting the podcast for YouTube, and those listeners are not going to hear the ads in my podcast. Now, I don't even know if I'll be compensated for it, but we'll see.
Yeah, so I believe that there are the same options that you have now, which is like if you have a YouTube video, if you have a video, you can say includes paid promotion. I think that you'll be able to do that with the podcast as well, so there wouldn't be a conflict there. But yeah, I'm just thinking about the all important audience growth part, is that if you can pay for other people to get in front of people, that might be very helpful.
David, you've got a pretty significant podcast with a lot of episodes in it. How are you going to handle it?
I'm not sure. I've just been getting a lot of my podcasts I work on onto YouTube in one way or another. But you're asking about YouTube, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like how you going to put all those up there, and how you going to organize it to? I mean, especially if it's going to go into YouTube Music, and you've got a music podcast, that might be beneficial.
It also might be a problem because they might flag a lot of our podcasts.
Are you worried about it getting pulled down if you're playing music on there?
You're finally going to get caught. Johnny Ampass is going to finally catch up. Or what is it?
Johnny Law.
Yeah, it's going to finally catch up with you.
All right. So first of all, I'm squarely within the boundaries of what is legal under the U.S. Copyright Act, and I'm quite confident of that. However, YouTube is notorious for blocking copyright protected music, and we know why they do it. They don't want you to be able to go to steal the music, and which everybody does anyways. But so to answer your question, Matt, I think I'm not sure I have a plan. My plan is to get podcasts on YouTube, period, and I think it's more a sense of I think it's more important to do it going forward. If you're a podcaster trying to move up that pyramid, and you're worried about getting all your back episodes, manually adding them to YouTube, which from what I hear, you would have to do that, right? Because it still doesn't accept an RSS feed.
Yeah, unless they do the RSS feed. What I would recommend, David, if you were going to do that, I would just find someone on Fiverr to do it. Be like, I need you. I'm going to give you. I'm going to create a YouTube login. I'm going to create a YouTube account. It's going to be a random email that I make and a random password. So that way, this person that you're hiring doesn't, you're not giving them your email access. And just say, here's MP3 files of everything. Here's the thumbnail that I need. I'll pay you $50 to upload every single one of these.
And that's probably the best way to go. And so, yes, I may do that. But if you don't mind talking about that other issue briefly, because it will become an issue for a lot of people. The Spotify police have emerged, not YouTube. I don't know whether YouTube's going to go crazy with podcasts to knock out what they deem copyright protected material, but I've been getting emails from Spotify. I don't know if you guys have been getting these. It says, "Hi there. We wanted to let you know that there appears to be third-party content in your podcast, and additional information is needed to continue interrupted playback. Please review within 72 hours to avoid potential cancellation or whatever." And so what then you click through to that. I was trying to do it, but it's not working. But anyway, it'll name, like, it gave me my music podcast. It gave me the songs that appeared in the podcast, and then it said the options were, and I wish I had this in front of me, but it was like, yeah, I don't have copyright rights to this. I will fix it. You could click on that, or you can click on, I disagree, this is not third-party content. Or the most important one is, this is approved use under the fair use exception to the Copyright Act for commentary, criticism, parody, or there's another one I'm forgetting. And good on Spotify for recognizing that is a thing, because it is a thing. And on my music podcast, we play clips of, there's maybe 5 to 10 seconds of uninterrupted music, and then it's the host and I talking over it and commenting on it, which is exactly what the fair use thing is there for. So good on you, Spotify. It's going to be a pain in the ass every time I post one of these to click through and tell them, yes, I'm using this legally, but better than just wiping it off like YouTube probably still does.
YouTube will just nuke your channel and you're gone.
Right. Yeah. You don't even see it coming.
I had one note from Spotify. It wasn't my podcast. It was another one. And it was because a Radio ID had a Luke Combs song in it. Oh, and they were just profiling the radio station. But there's about 20 seconds of the song in there, which was enough. And I just took it out. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, should be interesting to see how all this sort of shakes out, and that we all have different strategies. One thing I would like to point out is, Johnny, this show runs on your channel and my channel on YouTube. We could both submit the podcast.
That's what I was going to do. I was just looking over out to the side. I was just going to set all of the live, because the only live videos I've done have been this podcast. So I was just going to set it all as a playlist and make that a podcast, because I played with the podcast tab that Catherine was talking about, and it does. She's right. It does whittle down everything that you would normally see. I'm not seeing NBA highlights anymore. It's all, podcasts that I would consume on YouTube. So I think it'd be worth it.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you for this going around? There's a 5. Catherine?
6.1.
Yeah.
I'll go 5.
David, how excited are you with all the work you have to do to?
Well, that's just it. I see, when people used to ask me about YouTube, I used to say file it under nice to have, but not essential, because podcasts are an audio creature. But I'm getting tugged more into that world, and I understand we need to be there. But it's to me, it's practicality. If you're a busy podcaster, you're probably not going to spend a ton of time creating a video version of your podcast. But you want it up there in some way, shape, form, or fashion to be redundant. Anyway,
let me counterpoint to you, Dave, because I would say probably 6, because there's a lot of discovery happening on YouTube. It would be nice. My dream would be for YouTube to somehow incorporate the RSS feed. So when how many people are listening to your podcast, you can have to say, well, I have this many on the podcast, but then this many on YouTube, and combine the two numbers. It'd be nice if it was one number you had at the ready to give somebody. But there are tools like Headliner, for example, that you can set up an automation to auto post your podcast to YouTube. I use that for a couple of clients that when that podcast publishes, within an hour, it's on YouTube, and it takes the show notes and it takes all that, puts it in the description, done. And it's not a heavy lift on the editor or the podcaster, Dave.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. I think you should be on YouTube. Absolutely. But I don't think it's not going to move you too far up the pyramid, not at this point. But heck, for all we know, getting on YouTube increases your audience by 25 to 30%. I just made that number up. Or at least it's going to increase your podcast being found by Google searches. It just makes it
I think it's a little bit unique to podcasts, to which specific podcasts too, because there are some podcasts that have more followers on YouTube than they do on the traditional RSS feed, and some that are vice versa. So it's kind of back to the beginning we talked about knowing your audience, figuring out where they're consuming your content, and really embracing that piece of it, wherever they're coming in strongest.
And we all know that a YouTube hit, what do we call it? Views. A YouTube view, I think to us, doesn't carry the same weight as a podcast download. However, if this is the new world, then maybe we're going to be just displaying two types of stats whenever, say, a potential sponsor asks you for what your download numbers are. Here are my downloads. Here are my views on YouTube. I'm not sure.
Well, they have asked for RSS feeds, so we will be submitting them at some point. And so the question is, are they going to just take those, the content from the RSS feed and cache it and keep it, or is it going to be, passed through and whatnot? So it's how is that? It's going to be interesting to see how they do it.
And then go ahead, Catherine.
No, you go, Johnny.
No, mine's taking it in a different direction.
Well, and I was going to say, David, you make me think of again, let me get philosophical here for a second. I think that in earlier podcasting, we were so passionate about making a distinction between we're not radio, we're not video, we're something special and different. And in that process, now that YouTube is coming back as a viable option for our shows, there's a little bit of almost like we're having to retread, or the word that's coming to my mind that's not quite right is sort of like a pride of letting go of that differentiation and coming back to YouTube and saying, yes, we want to be here and put things out with gusto. So maybe I'm sharing a little bit too about my own psychology about it, but I do see that as part of the issue here. Any agreement on that or thoughts on that?
I agree, and I'll add one more wrinkle, and that is that I was listening to a podcast the other day, which when asked to name the top, some expert, sorry, I don't remember who it was, but when asked to name what the top ways to grow their audience are that are kind of now and new and happening, the first one he said was live streaming, which is why the five of us hip happening, cutting edge people are doing this live stream right now. But and it's just, to me, if you're an aspiring podcaster, you're trying to grow your audience, it's like now your head's going to explode. It's like, well, now I got to be on YouTube and I got to live stream. But he brought up a couple good points, and that is there are things you can do on a live stream that you simply can't do on a regular recorded podcast. You can do calls to action, and you can touch your audience immediately. You can hear from them. If you start to, you do what you do when you start. You ask 12 of your friends, hey, do me a favor and just watch my live stream, and share it afterwards if you can. And so then maybe you start to develop an audience. You can do instant things like, sign up for our, email newsletter. You can put that up and have them do it immediately. And you can have people contribute to your show, the virtual tip jar or however they do it. Certain platforms have this, and certain people are making money off of this. So sorry if I went a far field there, but it was on my mind. I scared Jag off.
No, I was watching Jag have an existential crisis with whatever's going on down in his world over there. So,
we've shaken Jag's world.
Yeah, Johnny, did you want to take us in a different direction?
It was just one final tag on the YouTube thing. It's you can even kind of just split the difference. Once they start letting you access RSS feeds, you upload your RSS feed, but I still think that you should consider videoing your podcast, even if it's just for clips, because when I talked to Daniel J. Lewis on my podcast, he's very anti YouTube being a podcast platform, which is fine. Everyone can have that opinion, but he did, concede and compromise and say, it's a great opportunity to share 5, 10, 12-minute clips of your podcast. And if those are on video and then that pushes someone to the RSS feed that's still on YouTube, you're not asking them to leave YouTube and go to Spotify, go to Google Podcasts, go to Apple. Just click right below, boom, RSS feed, audio only podcast. Now they're hooked onto your show, or they're just someone who just consumes the clips. So I think there's sort of a middle ground that we can all be happy with.
Agreed.
All right, let's check in to see how Jag's doing. Jag, are you winning the war over there against your computer? He is not. Okay. So he is losing currently to, I guess that might be the bots there. That have
I like
attacked
that blue steel look, though, he's got going. Oh, now he's
Okay, so the last one that came up here, this was last Monday. Johnny put out his newsletter, and in the newsletter he said that he commented about DAI, that there was actually a debate going on, of which I was like, I've never heard of a debate involving whether DAI is good or bad, because I believe it is all good. So tell me about the ongoing sort of struggles between the two, Johnny. And
it's confirmation bias, Matt. You are so pro DAI coming from the radio world. This is what you live. I mean, from the conversations that I've had with either their clients of mine or other podcasters online, there's a big camp of people that say, I would much rather just burn an ad onto my podcast. I don't care if I could make more money potentially by swapping them out. It takes the listeners out of the show because it's not my voice. It's some crap, and obviously not Matt. Matt does amazing voiceover, but it's some crackpot voiceover artist recording in their kitchen for iHeart saying like, go buy healthcareinsurance.gov USA. Like, it's just not the type of content it's not the ads that my audience wants to see. It doesn't fit with my audience. The levels are off. It's terrible. I can't fit it in the right area of my podcast. I'm just not into it. So there is that camp. And then there's the camp that Matt's in, which is very pro DAI. We think it's great for podcasters. It's less work. You can make more money. You can utilize your back catalog. You don't have to spend the extra time burning an ad that you have to record yourself. You don't have to go out and find the sponsors yourself. You can do it all online without having to really talk to people. So I see that there's these two sides of DAI, and I think that ultimately we're just so early on in it that there are the two camps. And as technology continues to increase, there will be better discovery, better alignment between advertisers and hosts, better optionality for, and Matt, there is technology that you've talked about where you can be very specific as the host of, I don't want these ads. I only want these types of ads. I think it just needs more time. And as time progresses, I think the DII will be the primary way that people do podcast advertising. And if you want to split the difference now, Jag made a great point a couple of live streams ago. You can just use DAI to promo your own stuff. You can do your own recording. You can make the levels great. You can use your own microphone. That way you're in control of all the content that's being put out there, but you can still utilize DAI and all that it has to offer.
But just to be clear, when you said DAI, and then there are ads coming in that sort of you don't have anything to do with, that doesn't have to be DAI, right? I mean, you can set your own, you can create your own ads, you can approve your own ads and have only them run.
That's what I do.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. There's a misnomer there, I think, about DAI. To Johnny's point, is that it's not, Mattress Firm and ZipRecruiter coming in and spamming your audience. It's whatever you want in your show. So the A in DAI, the ad, is a little bit of a misnomer because it should really be DCI, it should be dynamic content insertion. It doesn't have to
audio
be an ad.
insertion.
Yeah.
I stand corrected. Thank you, Matt. I need more coffee. But I think people think of it as dynamic ad insertion. I'm going to kick Save into beauty there, but I think it's going to be. I think it's important to remember that it doesn't have to be a commercial. It can be a promo for your show to, and I mentioned this, what I mentioned a couple times ago, is that it's, the radio podcast I did, we used it to sell tickets to our banquet. I had an ad that ran, hey, get your tickets now, it's this price. And then that changed. Hey, get your tickets, it's this price. Hey, get your tickets, it's this price every time the ticket price went up. And I used that with a marker so I didn't have to reprogram 50 episodes every time.
We really need to do an all DAI episode sometime. Put that on the
I think we probably could do one and talk about all the different ways that it can be used and the dynamic audio insertion episode, as it were. I know a lot of it. I think a lot of people are, confused by it. But what does it mean? So you put a mid-roll marker in, and then there's the line, and then what happens next? Well, it could be a Mattress Firm ad, but it could also be one of your ads, and it depends. Like, I'm in Spain right now, and I'm getting Spanish ads, so I'm getting paid for stuff. So, so with that said, I'm going to mark that down as a show idea, Catherine.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It's 6:00 here in Spain. It's siesta time for me. I don't know what time it is for the rest of you, but anyhow, going around, everybody give yourself a plug, and thanks for doing this week.
I'm John Gay, Jag in Detroit Podcast. You can find me on social at Jag in Detroit or on my website, jagindetroit.com.
Thanks for being here, everybody. My name's Catherine O'Brien. You can find me on Twitter at Hello Catherine O.
David Yaz in Boston, pod617.com, the Boston Podcast Network. We produce podcasts remotely or in Boston. And if you're interested, because I know you are, about that music podcast I keep talking about, it's called Past Tens. And you can find all about it at the website, timemachinepod.com.
Johnny Podcast. Go find me on Substack, the Johnny Podcast newsletter.
I'm Matt Kundle, currently in Malaga, Spain, with the Sound Off Podcast Network. Thanks a lot for joining us. We'll do it again next month.